Our Bibles, please open to 2 Kings, and we're going to be in chapter 4. We're going to just pick up right where we left off. And 2 Kings chapter 4, let's pray and then just receive from his word as he sends it forth by his Spirit. So Father, we do come tonight with our hearts open wide to you, desiring to have your word just minister life to our souls. We know that you send it with purpose and with power. And God, it's the milk and the manna and the bread on which the soul is fed and filled to overflowing. So God, we have a hunger and a desire for the things of God that you reveal to us in your word. So God, we open our heart now to you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, well, here we are in the 2 Kings, and we have just been reading the story of Elijah and really the transformation of his life to that point where he was taken up in a whirlwind into heaven. One of only two people in the Bible that did not experience death. It's really quite an amazing thing to see. Really what God has done to make such a powerful and great man. And we talked about some over the weekend as well. But then the mantle, that the calling of that prophet of God fell to Elisha, whom God had given Elijah to train up. And so now Elisha has the mantle. If you remember that moment when he was taken to heaven, his mantle fell from him. And it represented that authority of that position of prophet. Elisha picked it up, went to the Jordan, and really hit the water with it. It divided, another miraculous event in the scriptures. He passed over. It was God's confirming that he is called to be the next great prophet. And we've been reading some of the story now of the demonstration of God's power. Now, it's important to recognize the bigger picture here, and that is this, that Israel is divided north and south, and in the north, there's a time of tremendous spiritual darkness. And what does God do in response to spiritual darkness? He sends the greatest prophets of the Old Testament. It's important to note that God does not give up, but God continues to pursue them. Even though they're wandering away, even though they're going after the gods of the world, he sends prophets to challenge them because he loves them. This is so important. Israel is his people. He loves his people. He loves his chosen nation. And he has placed his name there, and he is going to fulfill his promises to Israel. And so he keeps pursuing them, and that's what we're seeing right now. So now we go to chapter 4 of 2 Kings, where some of these amazing demonstrations of God's power are revealed, and there are so many important life lessons for us out of this story. So we pick it up, 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1. Now there was a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets. So you have the context. There was you might call it even a school of the prophets. And so those who were attending there, those who were growing and learning there, were called sons of the prophets. Well, there was one who had a wife. And she then cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead." So this is a great tragedy that has befallen her now. "And you know that your servant feared the Lord." And she uses here the name of the Lord, Jehovah, Yahweh. You know that he feared. And the word feared here is to respect. He revered Jehovah. You know this is true. So therefore he knew him. And so she comes and says, "You know this is so." And now it tells the tragedy of her case. "The creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves." And this was a thing in the time. If a person got so poor that they could not pay their debts, then they would become indentured slaves, you might say, so as to repay the debt. So she brings this terrible tragedy, and it has befallen her because her husband has died, who feared the Lord. So Elisha said to her, "What shall I do for you?" And that's just an expression. In other words, let's consider, what shall I do for you? Tell me. what do you have in the house? And she said, your maidservant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil. That is all that I have. She's a very poor woman. Her husband has died, has no provision. I have nothing left except a jar of oil. So he then said to her, go now, borrow vessels at large, which means go out and about and start gathering vessels, pots, we might call them. Go gather vessels out and about. Large ones for yourself from all of your neighbors, even empty vessels. Do not get a few. And you shall go in, shut the door behind you and your sons, and then pour out into all these vessels, and you shall set aside what is full. So she went from him and shut the door behind her and her sons, and they, the people around her, were bringing the vessels to her, and she poured. And it came about that when the vessels were full, that then she said to her son, bring me another vessel. And he said to her, there is not one vessel more. They have filled every possible vessel, pot, clay pot, everything they could find, they have filled it up. There is not a single vessel left. And then the oil stopped. Then she came and she told the man of God, and he said, now go and sell the oil, pay your debt, and you and your sons can live on the rest. Okay, what an amazing provision. This is one of those miraculous stories, and there's a very important reason that God puts it in here. First of all, he puts this in here that the name of the Lord would be glorified. He's sending his prophet to a people of spiritual darkness. He's amongst the sons of the prophets. And so there is something there. There is a group of people. There are still some. There's a remnant of those who are still holding with great faith the name of the Lord and honoring, revering. Those are the ones that this miracle is done amongst them. That the word, no doubt, is going to spread amongst the sons of the prophets. And the sons of the prophets are going to tell the great stories of what God's done in the provision of this miraculous situation, that people would then take notice. You know, it's like when God did all of those miracles and plagues against Egypt, that the world will know that there is a God, in Israel. That's the idea, the demonstration of his great hand. But I can tell you also, that there are a lot of people out there who would want to try to manipulate the story into one of, health, wealth, and prosperity. You know what I'm saying by this? You got to believe God for more wealth. He'll fill the oil pots. And they can kind of move in that way. But I don't see that in the story. I see a declaration of God's power to a spiritually dark people. But I do love the woman's faith. You got to really believe that this woman herself believed that God was able. God was able. She saw the power in this man, this prophet of God. God is able. She turned to him for help in time of need. That's a right thing. Now, does God today do miracles? I suggest to you that God does miracles. Does anybody want to agree with me? Does God heal today? I believe he does. And I could tell you so many stories from my own life. As I said before, I wish I could write a book. Oh, God, give me the time. I would love to write a book about the amazing, miraculous, irrefutably miraculous ways that God has proved himself to me over and over and over. Anybody want to maybe add your own testimony? But let me just tell you one very important factoid, and that is that God has given the greatest proof and evidence to the world. You want to talk about proofs and evidences? The greatest proof and evidence that God has given to the world is when God raised Jesus from the dead. In fact, it tells us in the book of Acts chapter 17 that God has called all men everywhere to repent because he has fixed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness, having furnished proof to all men by raising Jesus from the dead. You want proof and evidence? There is that proof and evidence. And our faith is founded. That is the foundation stone of all that we believe that God has done for us, because every promise is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Amen? So it's very important to see this great provision. She looked to God. You got to love that. She looked to God. Now, verse 8 continues with another story. Now, there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem. Now, Shunem is a small town. It's in the Jezreel Valley. And it's a common place, kind of a crossroads kind of thing. If you're going north or south, you might go through Shunem. If you're going from the coast down to the Jordan, through the Jezreel Valley, you would come through Shunem. So it's a common place. And there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem, where there was a prominent woman. Now, she persuaded him to eat food, and which was very common in those days. People did not have, restaurants and things as they were traveling about. They depended on the hospitality of others, and it was a very common thing. If you had the provision, it was a statement of your character to have hospitality. In those days, that was a very important aspect. So she was a woman with character, and she had hospitality. So she convinced him, please come eat food. So he turned in there as often as he passed by, verse 8, when he passed by, he would turn in there to eat food. Well, one day she said to her husband, behold, now I perceive that this is a holy man of God passing by us continually. Behold, now I perceive. She doesn't really know him. She has not heard yet of the great stories. So she doesn't really know him, but she perceives something about him. I perceive. This is a man of God. This is a tremendous, holy man of God. Now, I love this little observation here, because doesn't it make you wonder, doesn't it make you wonder what people think of you? What would they say if you were passing by, and stopping in for a meal, which was common, and you get to know people in the conversations and the goings and doings of other people's lives. You get to know them. What would they say? Wouldn't it be marvelous? Wouldn't it be a desire of your heart that people could look at you and say, now here, God is doing something in this one. There is something at work in this one. There's something beautiful in the character of this one. I like this one. There's something of God in this one. There is character, there is spirit in this one. How many people would say, man, I would love to have a character like that. I'd like to have a bearing like that. I'd like to have a soul like that. That someone would say, there's something of God going on there. I didn't say perfect. I don't think, there's not a perfect man among us. There's not a perfect woman. I'm not saying that. But a bearing of something of God. There's something of God there at work. Because, they talk to you. They get to know you. They get to know your story. Wouldn't it be amazing if they, after talking with you, they came away saying, God's doing something there in that life. That's a beautiful soul. How many people would say, I want a soul like that. I want a character like that. That's what I'm desiring. God, do this in me. Do this in me. Now, this is something I say this is something that God builds. God builds this. This is God's spirit at work in a man or a woman. God builds this. Step by step, you walk the course of life with God. This is something God does. You walk with him, and he'll transform you to be like him. The peace of God, the character of God, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness. I'm mentioning here the fruit of the Spirit out of Galatians 5:22. That is the result of God in your life. The fruit of God in your life is seen in that aspect of your character and your faith. And I just love the story. All right, there's more to the story. So she says, behold, I perceive this man is a holy man of God who passes by us continually. Please, she says to her husband, let's make a little walled upper chamber, and let us set a bed for him there, and a table and a chair and a lampstand. And then it shall be when he comes to us that he can turn in there. So she wants to do a great kindness. Let's put up a little room on the roof. Now, by the way, in Israel, it's very common to have a flat roof. I know that's kind of foreign to us here in Oregon, where we have so much rain and snow and all that. But in Israel, they have a flat roof with a parapet wall, a safety wall. And it would be very commonplace to go up onto the roof in the cool of the evening and kind of sit there and drink an iced tea. Okay, they didn't have iced tea, but that's the idea. You sit in the cool in the evening and you just kind of let the breeze and you're talking. And it's a very common place for people to just kind of hang out. And so she says, I know what let's do. We have a man of God. Let's do something kind. Let's put up a little walled upper room there, and he can have a little bed, and he can stay there when he comes by. So one day, verse 11, he came there and turned into the upper chamber and rested. Then he said to Gehazi, his servant. All right, now this is the first we meet Gehazi. It was very common, of course, for such a man like this to have an assistant who attended to and helped him. He said to Gehazi, his servant, call this Shunammite. If you're from Shunem, then you're a Shunammite. Call this Shunammite. And when he had called her, she stood before him. And he said, and he said to him, say now to her, he said to his servant, say now to her, behold, you have been careful for us with all this care. Now, the word there in the Hebrew, they're saying, you've been careful, but in the Hebrew, it might be better translated, you've been very respectful. Say to her now, you have been very careful, very respectful for us with all this care. What can I do for you? Would you be spoken for to the king or to the captain of the army, perhaps? And she said, now this is a very interesting answer. She said, I live among my own people. What do we make of this answer? Her answer, interpreting the culture out of it, means I have everything I need. That's really what it means. I live among my own people. I have no need for the king, to a favorable word to the king. I have no need to say anything to the captain of the army. I am blessed. I am blessed. That's what it means. I live amongst my own people. I'm blessed. I just love her heart. Like, thank you for offering me something. I don't need anything. I'm blessed. I live among my own people. So he said to his servant, verse 14, what then is to be done for her? And he wants to do something. So Gehazi, the servant, answered, truly, she has no son, and her husband is old. So he said, call her. So when he had called her, she stood at the doorway. And then he said to her, at this season next year, you shall embrace a son. And she said, no, my Lord, oh man of God, don't lie to your maidservant. What does that mean? Like that's such an amazing thing you've just said there. Like I can hardly imagine the greatness of what you're saying to me. Like don't lie to me. In other words, that's almost more than I can even hope for. Kind of reminds me of that scripture, that God will do exceedingly abundantly beyond all that you ask or even think. It's kind of like one of those things. Like, wow, don't lie to me. In other words, like, don't kid me, sort of thing, but it's much more respectful. This is so much to even consider. And the woman conceived and bore a son at that season the next year, as Elisha had said to her. Now, when the child had grown, the history of this quickly moves. After the child, or when the child was grown, the day came when he went out to his father to the reapers. He's old enough now to go out to the field and, help his dad. So he said to his father one day, my head, something has happened. There's a great pain. My head. And so the father said to his servant, carry him to his mother. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. This is a terrible tragedy. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, and shut the door behind him, and went out. Then she called her husband, and she said, please send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and return. She has not told the husband yet that he has died. She's simply asking for a helper, a servant, and a donkey. And then the husband says, why will you go to him now, today? It is not new moon or Sabbath, which might be an occasion to visit the prophet. But she said, it will be well. Interesting. It will be well. There is something in this woman of tremendous growing faith. It will be well. So then she saddled a donkey and said to her servant, drive on, go forward. Do not slow down the pace for me unless I tell you. So she went and came to the man of God to Mount Carmel. This is on the upper northwest end of the Jezreel Valley. It came about when the man of God saw her at a distance, he said to his servant Gehazi, behold, yonder is the Shunammite. Please run now, meet her, and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with your child? And she said the answer, it is well. Now, this is an interesting answer because we know that's not so. But let's forgive her. In the moment of her grief, she has not tried to deceive. She has a reason. She must see the man of God. And so she brushes off the answer. That's really what she's doing, so that she can find the man of God. So, verse 27, when she came to the man of God, to the hill, she caught hold of his feet. This isn't quite a scene now. She's pushed off the servant because she had to see the man of God. And when she sees the man of God, she falls down, takes hold of his feet. And then Gehazi came near to try to push her away, but the man of God said, no, let her alone. Her soul is troubled within her, and the Lord has kept it from me and has not told me. Then she said this, did I ask for a son from the Lord? Did I not say, don't deceive me? And then he said to Gehazi, gird up your loins, take my staff in your hand, go your way, and if you meet any man, do not salute him, and if anyone salutes you, you do not answer him, and you lay my staff on the lad's face. So, in other words, this is of utmost urgency. Take my staff, the wooden staff that he held in his hand, take it, run. To gird up one's loins means literally to take hold of the cloth material, tuck it into the waistband so you can run and don't stop, run, always run, and take my staff and lay it on the boy. So then, verse 30, the mother of the lad said, now would you notice this phrase, because it might sound somewhat familiar. The mother of the lad said, as the Lord Jehovah lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. And he arose and followed her. Now, right away, you might say, I recognize that, because this is the very same thing that Elisha said to Elijah. If you remember the story, we looked at it last week, where Elijah knew his time was come to be taken, to heaven. And so he said to Elisha, please remain here while I move go to the next city. And Elisha each time would say, as the Lord lives, as you yourself live, I will never leave you. And there's something of that determined faith. I will not let go. There is something in me that is so decidedly holding on. I will not let go. And I tell you, it's a tremendous picture of faith. This is really what it is. It's a picture of faith. I will not let go. And this is a very important aspect of faith, because there are many things that are troubled things of life, storms, difficulties, to lose one's son, to lose one's daughter is a tremendous shaking of your faith. I speak from which I know, from having lost a daughter. And it shakes you to the very core of your being. I know this pain. It is a deep, deep pain. But to hold on to faith means I believe. I don't understand, but I know in whom I have believed. See, I don't understand, but I know in whom I have believed. And I am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've entrusted to him until that day. There is an entrusting to and a belief that God keeps all things. And I will hold on. I will not let go. This is very important, because I tell you, faith is the key to our lives. It's the key to our lives. It's what helps us to understand what God is doing in this life. We need to recognize the significance. Don't let your faith be shaken. Because Jesus said that one who hears these words of mine takes hold of them. In other words, will live according to them. He says, I will tell you whom he is like. He's like a man building a house who dug deep and laid a foundation on the rock. Then when the storm comes and the wind, the waves blow against that house, it will not shake it, for it has been well built. He's talking about a well-built life. Build your life on this, because his point is there will be storms, there will be troubles, there will be terrible tragedies of life. This Jesus said himself, in this life you will have many troubles. But take courage, man, because I have overcome the world. I tell you, we could do a show of hands. Many people in this very room would say, I too have encountered many troubles, but I know in whom I have believed, and I entrusted those troubles to my God. I'll just say, this is the substance of faith, to believe. I will not leave you. I will hold on. Now, you might say, is this the greatest aspect of faith? Well, perhaps there's maybe one greater aspect of faith, but we're not going to falter for not having the faith. You remember the time when Jesus was up in the northern region, and a Roman centurion soldier came to Jesus and said, my servant is sick, even to the point of death. And Jesus said to the Roman centurion, I will come with you and heal him. And the Roman centurion answered, Roman, did I mention he's Roman? Roman centurion answered and said, no need, sir. For I too am a man under authority. And I say to this one, go, and he goes. And I say to this one, come, and he comes. All you need do is say the word, and my son will be healed. I'm not worthy for you to come under the roof of my house, sir. And there's no need for you to come. Simply say the word, and my son will be healed. Jesus saw this, and he said, I have not seen faith like this in all of Israel. This is amazing faith right here. This is amazing. I have not seen faith like this anywhere in Israel. Go, he says, your son is well. Interestingly, the centurion went his way. And as he was going, one of his servants came to meet him, and with news, your son is well. And he said, and what time? What time did that happen? Yesterday, about this time, something like this. And he knew right away, that's when the master said, and your son will be healed. There's something glorious about the story. You gotta love the story. But this woman, this is a demonstration. This is a picture of faith that holds on. I will not leave you. So he arose and followed with her, verse 31. Then Gehazi passed on before them, laid the staff on the boy's face, but there was neither sound nor response. So he returned to meet him, and he said, the lad has not awakened. So Elisha came into the house. Behold, the lad was dead and laid on his bed. So he entered and shut the door behind them both, and he prayed to the Lord. This is a magnanimous story. Such a thing has only been done once before, and that was by Elijah. And so he came in and he prayed to the Lord. And then he went up and he lay on the child, and he put his mouth on his mouth and eyes on his eyes and hands on his hands. And he stretched himself on the boy, and the flesh of the child became warm. Then he returned and walked in the house once back and forth. Then he went up and stretched himself on him. And the lad then sneezed 7 times. And the lad opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite. So he called her, and when she came in to him, he said, take up your son. Then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground, and she took up her son and went out. What an amazing, powerful story. And God is absolutely demonstrating his power over death and building faith in Israel, so that when Jesus arises on the scene, as I mentioned when we looked at this story in the story of Elijah, when Elijah raised the widow's son, that he's building faith in Israel, so that when Jesus arrived on the scene and he called out to Lazarus, come forth, and he brought him out of the tomb after he was dead for 4 days, that there would be a declaration, here is the man of God who defeats death. I am the resurrection. I am the life, Jesus said. He who believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Jesus said. He is the one who has defeated death. And then when Jesus was raised from the dead, that is the proof and evidence of who Jesus is. I love when he says, and do you believe this? And our answer is, yes, Lord, we believe. And so what a tremendous story. Verse 38, then Elisha, here's another one of those great stories. Then Elisha returned to Gilgal. This is quite on the other side of Israel. There was a famine in the land. And as the sons of the prophets were sitting before him, likely giving a lesson on faith, wouldn't you have loved to sat in the class as Elisha was speaking to the sons of the prophets? What would he say to the sons of the prophets? And I love this scene right here, because this is what God would have men and women do today. There is such a necessity of speaking into the next generation. There is so much that God has given to those who have walked a few years. Have you walked a few years in the Lord? Then you got something to say to those who are coming up after you. God wants us to speak to the next generation. I tell you what, it's the greatest calling of my life. And I pray that you would take hold of that vision, because there are many, many young people around you and me who need to hear a word of strength and a word of faith. We need to put into that next generation a word of faith, because this is a very troubled world, and yet there are and will be always a remnant. God will always have a few. Oh, do I want God to move in the next generation? Anybody join me on this? We need to speak life into them. Let God give a calling to each of us. I love this scene as he's speaking to the sons of the prophets. But then, as he was sitting there at one point, he said to his servant, put on the large pot and boil some stew. We need to have some meal, right? Put on a pot, large pot, boil stew for the sons of the prophets. So one of them went out into the field to gather herbs and found a wild vine. And he gathered from it his lap full of wild gourds. We don't really know this is the proper and right definition of the word in Hebrew. It's a pretty good guess. Some kind of vegetable that was found wild. Gourd is a good possibility because there are poison ones. It's kind of like mushrooms. There are good ones and there are bad ones, and then there are really bad ones. And so he goes and finds this gourd, wild gourds, fills his whole lap full of them. In other words, you know how you just kind of roll up your garment and fill it with, come back loaded with gourds. And so he came and sliced them into the pot of the stew. But would you please make note of this next line? But they did not know what they were. I'm suggesting to you that line right there, but they did not know what they were, is a life lesson unto itself. Know of which you are putting in the pot. Because if you don't know what you're putting in the pot, you could be adding poison to the stew. And that's exactly what happened. They did not know what they were. So they poured it out for the men to eat. And it came about as they were eating of the stew that they cried out and said, "Oh, man of God, there is death in the pot." And they were unable to eat it. Whatever that was, it was recognized as death, probably sharply bitter. Whatever it was, they recognized this as, they cannot eat it. There is death in the pot. By the way, there are definitely poisonous gourds that that grow in Israel. Absolutely. In many parts of the world, there are poisonous gourds. So that's why it's a pretty good possibility. To put something poison in the stew is, in fact, a great spiritual lesson. There are great spiritual lessons that come out of this story, because I tell you what, it's a picture of, now, the whole point of the story is what follows next. But then let's look at it for some interesting application. "Oh, man of God, there's death in the stew." And they were unable to eat it, verse 41. But he said, "Bring some meal." And so then they did, and he threw that into the pot. And then he said, "Now pour it out for the people that they may eat." And there was no harm in the pot. Now, I've read a number of commentators who try to figure out the chemical reactions and what kind of meal possibly could he have found that would neutralize the poison of a poisonous gourd. May I suggest to you that that's not the point of the story at all? Anybody want to agree with me? This is not about, they figured out Elisha knows chemical compositions and he threw something in. That has nothing to do with it. I'll tell you what it has to do with. This is a miracle of God. This is a miracle of God. That's the whole point. God did a miracle when he threw in the meal. The stew was miraculously made well. That's the point. There's a powerful man of God here. That's the point. That the sons of the prophets would see the power of the hand of God. God still moves in power. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should try such a thing, go make a poisonous stew and throw some meal in it. That's testing God. That's a very unwise thing to do. But I suggest to you that God is demonstrating to Israel in those days the power of the hand of God, and we must not discount the fact that God still moves in power. He intercedes in our lives. We ought to churn and trust that God is able to do that which we entrust to him. There's a very important aspect of believing, again, that God is able. But there's a great application. They didn't know what they were putting in the pot. And I suggest that there are many people who put things in their soul that are very poisonous today. And I tell you that there are so many souls in this world that are filled with poison. And I know that my God is able to take the soul that has been poisoned by the world, and he can take that soul and he can heal that soul that has been poisoned by the world. Because there's a lot of people who have been deeply, deeply poisoned. And it breaks the heart of the Lord. There is so much poison in this world. Oh, Lord, help the next generation. It's it just troubles my soul deeply to see what's happening in this world. This world is changing before our eyes. There is a deep spiritual darkness that's rising in this world, and it will take the next generation and ruin their lives without the intervening hand of God. Anybody want to agree with me? Let's give the Lord praise. Amen. For the intervening hand of God. Because God's doing it now. He's taking lives that are poisoned and broken and messed up. They've been taking in poison into their soul for so long. But God, you see, let me just say this, it's very important. When God takes a soul that's poisoned and heals that poisoned soul and brings it to newness of life, every single time it's a miracle. Because it was something that God did by his intervening hand, by the outpouring of his Holy Spirit on that person's life. That is the intervening, miraculous power of God. And God is still taking lives today, taking them from the poison of which they have lived and giving them newness of life. And every time it's a miracle. Amen? Let's give the Lord praise for that. And then we read another story, verse 42. Now, a man came from Baal Shalishah and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits. First fruits means of the first of the harvest, they make of this some bread. 20 loaves of barley, which is the first of the grain harvests in the spring, and fresh ears of grain in his sack. And he said, give them to the people that they may eat. Now this might remind you of a story. The prophet says, give them to the people that they may eat. And his attendant said, what? Shall I set this before 100 men? In other words, what is this amongst 100 men? But he said, give them to the people that they may eat. For thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left over. So he set it before them, 100 men, and they ate and had some left over according to the word of the Lord. Does that story sound familiar? And it sounds familiar for a reason, because again, I suggest that God is using such a story to build and set forth the foundation for when Jesus arrived on the scene, if you remember the story. There on the mountain in the north by Galilee, there was a great crowd who had come to hear Jesus teaching, and they had sat a long time, all day they sat to hear his teaching. And it tells us the crowd was 5,000 men, not counting women and children. This is a great crowd. And then at some point, they came to Jesus, release them, let them go, that they might go and find some place to eat. And where should they go? You give them something to eat, Jesus said, testing them. And so they came and said, there is a lad here with 5 loaves and 2 fish. But what is that among so many? And so Jesus you know the story, took the bread, broke it, and fed the entire crowd of 5,000 men, women, and children. And then it tells us that there were 12 baskets left over. There were 2 occasions when Jesus fed such a vast crowd, but this story is so remarkable that it's found in each of the 4 Gospels. And I suggest to you that this is put here to set forth the foundation for when Jesus arrived on the scene to do something like that, but is even greater. They fed 100 men with 20 loaves, but Jesus fed the crowd of 5,000 with 5 small loaves, very much like the size of maybe a little larger than a roll, and 2 small fish. And the point is, Jesus is something greater, something far greater than Elisha is here. God is demonstrating to the people of Israel something far greater than Elisha is here. It's like what Jesus said, something greater than Solomon is here. Something greater than Jonah is here. Something greater than the temple is here. He is Lord of the Sabbath. He is the one that God sent to declare all things to the world. It's a beautiful and powerful story. Chapter 5. We'll see how much time we have to get into chapter 5. Now, another story unfolds. There was a man named Naaman, captain of the army of the king of Aram, far to the north. He was a great man with his master. He was highly respected because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram, which is an interesting comment. Really? God would give victory to Aram through this man? Why would God do that? Because God actually had said to Israel, the day that you turn away and turn to the other gods, and you've left the God of Israel, you will encounter enemies. I will raise up enemies to oppose you. And so that's a fulfillment of that very word. The man was a valiant warrior, but he was a leper. Now, that's all backstory. The Arameans had gone out in bands and had taken captive a little girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife. Now, one day she said to her mistress, "Oh, I wish that my master, Naaman, I wish that my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria. Then he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went in and told the king, his master. And he said, "Thus and thus spoke the girl who is from the land of Israel." So the king of Aram said, "Go now, I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So he departed, Naaman did, and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 changes of clothes. So he brought this letter from the king of Aram to the king of Israel. And this is what the letter said. "And now, as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy." That's what you might call a misunderstanding. It wasn't the king who cured, who had the power of God. It was the prophet. But the king writes to the king of Israel, "I send Naaman to you that you would heal him of his leprosy." Now, verse 7, it came about when the king of Israel heard that, read the letter, he tore his clothes, which is a sign of deepest grief. He tore his clothes and he said, "What, am I God to kill and make alive that this man is sending word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Consider now and see how this man is seeking a quarrel against me." Now it happened that when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent word to the king saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel." Such confidence he has in the power of God. So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots, and he stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. So Elisha sent a messenger. Elisha didn't even come out to him. He sent a messenger, and he said to Naaman, Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean. But when Naaman heard this, he became furious. And he went away and he said, behold, I thought he would surely come out to me. He would stand and he would call on the name of the Lord his God. He would wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpah, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned away and went in a rage. But his servants came near and said to him, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he says to you, wash and be clean? And that word broke through to his mind. And he thought, yeah, that's right. That's a right word. So he goes down to the Jordan. And he goes down and he dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child. We have an expression for that in English. His skin was like, okay, let's move on. And he was clean. Now, what an amazing story is this? A man is healed of his leprosy? This is nothing short of amazing, yet again. And I submit, again, it is setting the foundation for when Jesus would come, but it's a great demonstration of tremendous things in Naaman, who is not even a Jew. By the way, before this story is over, he will become a follower of Jehovah, which is the very point. Before this story is over, he's going to be a follower of Jehovah, because to heal a leper was unheard of anywhere in the world. It was an incurable disease. Leprosy was absolutely a devastating, life-ending, cruel way of dying. And it was unheard of that a man could be healed of such a thing. But he believed the little girl and went and heard the word that Naaman said. At first, he's in a rage because he thinks, I thought he was going to do some great thing. But all he did was tell me to dip in the Jordan. Oh, I tell you, there's some really deep lessons here. By the way, whenever we go to Israel, it's very common for us to baptize people in the Jordan River, and we go to a place that would be very near to where Naaman went to be dipped in the Jordan. And it is, if you ever get a chance to go, be baptized in the Jordan River. It is just one of those life moments that you're like, that was so amazing, just to be baptized. Because Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River. And there's so much power of symbol in the message to it, and it's a remarkable story. We'll look at more of this next week. Let's pray because we're closing our time. Father, thank you so much, just revealing your hand through the story of this great prophet. And God, it reminds us yet again that faith is built upon a trust in a God who is able to do far exceedingly beyond all that we ask or even think. That God, anytime you take a person whose soul is poisoned and then you heal that poisoned soul and you bring life and hope and a foundation and newness of life, every time it's a miracle. And God, we give you thanks and glory for you're still on the move now, building and strengthening every one of our lives. God, in you we have found our hope. In you we have found our life, and there is no one else. There is hope in no one else. There is no one else that has eternal life, who has defeated death, who was raised from the dead as proof and evidence to us all. Well, we give you honor and glory for it, and thank you. Church, how many would say today to the Lord, You have won me. I want to live my life by honoring you in all that I do. You have won me over, God. I want to be that kind of man or woman that people would look at my life and say, there's something of God happening in that person. Church, how many people would say that to the Lord today? You have won me. I want to walk with you. I want to live my life to your glory. I want to be that kind of man or woman who walks in faith. Church, would you just say that to the Lord by just lifting your hand to the Lord and just making that declaration to him? Father, we love you. Thank you for you, the outpouring of your hand on our lives. Oh, how beautiful it is to walk in the ways of the Lord. We honor you and thank you for it now. In Jesus' name. And everyone said, can we give the Lord praise and glory?